How would a Napoleonic military fight off a dragon? Now that may sound like a silly concept. That's because it is. It is very silly, but there's so much dragon slaying content out there. You got Game of Thrones, you got The Hobbit, you got, actual medieval folklore, but all of it's so medieval. Okay, yeah, sometimes we get something modern, you get fighter jets and tanks and whatnot. Yeah, that's cool, yeah, but what's really lacking is long 18th century, St. George styles dragon slaying content. It's a fascinating time for military history, with a lot more, I think, unique and interesting elements than people give it credit for usually. So, how would they, the 18th century, the long 18th century, Napoleonics in particular here, fare against a flying, fire-breathing lizard? Well, first things first, we need to cover what kind of dragon we're talking about. Taking inspiration from a few bits of modern media, let's say that our dragon is around 100 meters long, it has armor like tenfold shields, and it's practically indestructible. Its teeth are swords, its claws are spears, and of course, it has to breathe fire. Now, in most media as well, that dragon fire seems to have a lot more of a punch to it than just like a flamethrower. Like some sort of a napalm substance of sorts that's being shot out with really extreme force, capable of bursting ships somehow, and even collapsing entire stone walls before burning them whenever the plot demands it. But these attacks are also pretty much always coming at a very close range. It seems like the dragon's breath doesn't go very far before it loses that extra strength and just becomes regular fire. So the dragon needs to fly low and fast to attack its targets. However, the wings are also thin, like those of a bat, and without the thick armored scales on its body, well, they're going to be exposed. They're also very large targets, the wingspan potentially stretching up to twice the length of the body. So that is our dragon, a terrible monster indeed. But what about the army that it faces? Well, let's just say that it's a generic, generally Napoleonic era style military. It's got a few dozen thousand soldiers, maybe even up to 100,000. It's got 100 or 200 cannon in various sizes and types, alongside a healthy mixture of both heavy and light cavalry to assist them. Really, there's no need to go too far into the weeds there, I don't think. My entire channel is dedicated to talking about all that kind of stuff. So if you're sort of new to Napoleonic military history and you want to learn about like the different kinds of infantry and how the cavalry operated, things like that, well, literally my entire channel is dedicated to that if you're new here. But besides, let's get to the actual fight. The most important thing for this army is that they're going to need to lure the dragon out into the open. Now, if this is the sort that covets gold, it probably began its attack by taking over a place like Versailles or some other grand palace, and it's probably in a city. But really, that's no place for this engagement to take place. Narrow alleyways, tons of obstructions, and so many civilians means that the army wouldn't have anything close to the concentration of force or rapidity of movement that it's going to need for this fight. Likewise, by this time period, cities are, well, they're massive, at least like the largest ones are, the sort that a dragon would probably go for, and their garrisons are comparatively small, with fortifications being largely based outside of the major population centers. They're designed to prevent the enemy armies reaching them to begin with. Once the enemy army is like in Paris, not much of a siege is really going to like stop them. If they're on the outskirts of Paris, no amount of Paris city walls are going to stop them from taking it over. Those forts are primarily designed for cutting off supply lines and preventing armies from moving in certain directions. It's a whole big to-do. And of course, they're all designed to combat humans, human armies, which, of course they did very well with their, multiple firing arcs and sloped walls and all that sort of thing. But for rather obvious reasons, they probably wouldn't fare too well against an enemy from the sky, against a dragon. So one way or another, really, if the dragon wants to take over Versailles, it's probably going to be able to do it. The army needs to lure the dragon out into the open. Maybe it uses, a pile of gold to do so. Dragons covet gold. Maybe a princess, a fair maiden or something, a giant pile of fish. Whatever it is, thankfully, if they're able to do so, this also means, though, the army's laying its little trap, they're going to get to select their own ground. That's an important part of all this. The ground on which an engagement is fought is typically one of the most important deciding factors of it. And so much of Napoleonic warfare, indeed warfare prior to that point as well, was based around trying to maneuver your men in the best possible way around the enemy in order to then condense your forces at the decisive point of your choosing where the enemy is off guard. Perhaps Napoleon's greatest skill as a general wasn't in actual field command, but instead it was in the more strategic view. It was in bringing all of his troops to bear on the same battlefield in precisely the manner he needed them, being able to concentrate his armies, smashing through scattered opponents one by one, even when, on the whole, he was outnumbered. A lot of times, people think about this general time period as being filled with slow-moving formations of men who would just take turns shooting back and forth at one another. But the reality was almost exactly the opposite. This was largely owing to, at least in the Napoleonic eras, the sheer scale and complexity of the armies, which was largely unprecedented in European history. This was owing to a lot of things, like new forms of conscription and the wider nationalization of war. So that these armies would, be too large to travel as single large blocks, but instead they're going to be split up among many different divisions and corps, all acting in tandem with one another. Now, the thing about this fight is that the dragon is large. It's fast and it's powerful. It's able to move rapidly across the field and apply massive amounts of force at whatever point it so chooses. But thankfully for the humans, those are also the exact same principles upon which so much of Napoleonic-era warfare operates. Again, really, the entire 18th century has those same principles, but it sort of reached its zenith, its peak in the Napoleonic era. So you see, in fantasy battles, in the sorts of environments where dragons are usually fighting, the dragons almost always have the advantage because they're going up against these small, often slower moving medieval-style armies that have limited force projection. Most of their guys are with, spears and sword and board. Only a portion of the army is going to be dedicated to arrows and ballistas and the sorts of things that could reach the dragon. And there's only going to be like a couple thousand of them. It's a small field. You can just lay them all out and one guy can command the entire bunch because it's like 4,000 or 5,000 guys at most. Napoleonic armies, like I said, we're talking like tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of men. You have multiple generals. The battles are like miles long. It's a lot more complicated, which is precisely the sort of system that we're going to need to slay this dragon reliably without using any sort of magic or heroic nonsense. So how are we going to go about doing it? Well, we'll come to that, of course, right after a sponsored message. I am delighted to say that this video is sponsored by Architerica, the tabletop role-playing game of genteel conspiracy, secret societies, and terrors unseen and unearthly, and rather ungentlemanly. If you're interested in the topic of this video, then I have a feeling that this game will be of interest to you. It's set in a pseudo-historical world, which is roughly equivalent to our French Revolutionary and Napoleonic eras. Within the setting of social upheaval, scientific discovery, and terrible wars, you will navigate hidden worlds and secret societies, uncover dark secrets, and engage in even darker rituals of the occult. Imagine a noir-style sharp with a healthy smattering of Lovecraft. Depending on how you play, you could be fighting things like this, called the Mistwalkers, with lines of muskets, or you could be skulking about the halls of regal country houses, trying to discover a dangerous eldritch artifact which was stolen from a university or something like that. Now, I absolutely adore the art style that fills the rulebooks here. I think that it captures exactly that kind of Lovecrafty 18th century vibe, occultish style, so well. And I can speak from experience as well that I think the game is a lot of fun too. I was very generously invited by one of the game's creators to play with himself and a few other online creators, where we were tasked with investigating the mysterious and rather suspicious death of our good mayor. Now, if you don't mind many spoilers, well, let's just say that the mayor wasn't really all he was cracked up to be. Things got a little weird. That whole game is actually available to watch online here on YouTube if you'd like to see me in an RPG playing a pretentious, foppish coward, aka, well, really just myself, and facing down the barrel of Lovecraftian horrors. It was a lot of fun, and I think it really is noteworthy how the game starts off as like almost a purely historical experience, and then as you get in, it slowly sort of peels back those layers of fantasy and horror and whatnot, which makes it a much more grounded experience, and it's exactly the kind of thing that I enjoy in settings like this. So again, like I said, if you enjoy playing tabletop RPGs and you're interested in this general time period, and especially if you enjoy, Lovecrafty, occultish kind of stuff, well then this game is quite literally made for you. I would strongly and enthusiastically encourage you to check it out. The game is in its last days of an already incredibly successful Kickstarter now, which I'll link that down in the description down below, and alongside the game that I already played, and of course their website. Thank you to Architerica for sponsoring this video and for helping me to come up with such a fun, silly topic for a video. Now let's get back to it. Okay. So here's how I see this playing out. Assuming that one way or another the dragon has been pulled into the field and is set on fighting this army. Maybe it's angry or something. Let's say that the humans have chosen a field that looks more or less something like that of Waterloo to spring their trap. It really is the perfect dragon fighting environment, with multiple hills you could hide troops among, a few towns in the vicinity, and a number of potential strong points, sort of in between those hillsides. The humans are going to garrison those strong points in the middle of the field exactly the same as they would against another, army. They only need a small number of men, a sort of forlorn hope, who are almost guaranteed to die unless they can escape on time. But unfortunately, combating a near invincible mythical beast is going to cost a lot of lives. As Napoleon himself said, he could spend 30,000 men in a month. It's a grim method of war, but, really, once you get to a certain scale, soldiers really do become a form of currency in achieving certain objectives. It's cruel, but unfortunately it's necessary. The humans inside these strong points, which the strong points surely will not stand up to dragonfire for even a second, they're almost surely going to have to be light infantry, including riflemen, if they're available. Units that are accustomed to rapid movement and taking accurate shots at a long distance. If the army has any kinds of swivel or wall guns available, well then it's here that they're going to need to be deployed. A normal cannon won't be able to reach high enough to reliably reach that swooping dragon, let alone be able to track the target fast enough. You need something that's sort of individually controlled by one or two people at most and is very light. Now, from all of those troops, the only ones among them who are going to be using their regular rounds are the riflemen. As the dragon is swooping down upon them, they can do their best to take careful shots at any weak points in the dragon's armor. Presumably there has to be some kind of weakness, under the wings or the legs, around the tail. Most importantly, they should be aiming for the eyes. And meanwhile, the light infantry, who are just carrying regular old, service muskets, are still capable of very accurate shots, but they're not going to be firing their regular old musket balls. No. Instead, they're going to take a lesson from the Americas. They're going to be firing buckshot, where not only do they have the single larger ball, but then 2 or 3 smaller shots as well, all within the same cartridge, which creates a sort of shotgun effect. It's going to be a lot less accurate. It's not anywhere near so far ranged as a regular musket would be, but it's brutal stuff when it hits, which is why it was really popular with both sides, actually, of the American War of Independence, not just the rebels, like you may think. Now, when the dragon is coming down, they aren't going to be shooting at the eyes, they're going to be shooting at the wings. Now, here we're taking a lesson out of naval warfare. They're going to be trying to shoot as many holes in those wings as they possibly can where the dragon's flesh is weakest. Now, of course, they're not going to be anywhere near sufficient to actually take the dragon out of the sky. So then we have the swivel and the wall guns all loaded with similar shots. The wall guns take as many musket balls as they can cram down those barrels, and the swivel guns, again depending on their size, they can either be shooting tiny little chain shots if they're available, or if nothing else, a smaller number of musket balls, or maybe like half-pound, even 1-pound balls. It can be a variety of different ammunition types all mixed in to try and get this general effect. But the aim of it all is weakening those wings as much as physically possible. These aren't the sorts of weapons that are normally being carried by land armies, but I imagine they can make some sort of a special dispensation with the Navy, given the unusual situation that they're facing. But still, all of this, all of that fire and everything from these very strong points, let's be honest, that's not going to take down this beast. If we are lucky, maybe the dragon will stop a little bit above each strong point to just engulf it with the flames and ensure their kill, which at least is going to hold the dragon in place for a moment. Now, if we are very lucky, maybe the dragon will even land to tear into them a little bit more. Personally, plenty of dragons do seem to enjoy that kind of melodrama, after all. But one way or another, now, if the guys who are manning those strong points are able to get out before the dragon fire hits them, awesome, great, good for them. But unfortunately, they are really only a distraction. They are the first wave of attack. They're the forlorn hope. They're there to slow the dragon down in any capacity they possibly can. And as the dragon is seen to commit to this assault, swooping in, a signal will need to be given. A rocket, maybe a gun going off, something like that. At which point, the masked batteries and the buried batteries might be revealed from the nearby hillside. According to the Philosophical and Mathematical Dictionary, published 1815, a covered or masked battery is anywhere the cannon and gunners are covered by a bank or breastwork commonly made of brushwood, faggots, and earth, called a fascine battery. And a sunken or buried battery is when its platform is sunk or let down into the ground so that trenches must be cut into the earth opposite the muzzles of the guns to serve as embrasures to fire through. Now, typically, this kind of tactic would only be employed in sieges because it's antithetical to the necessities of so much of Napoleonic warfare. The usual mode of the day was for artillery to be as fast-moving as possible and to be deployed en masse at the point of greatest effect and to be moved as necessary. Normally, just hiding your artillery behind a building or a ridge is going to be sufficient if you're fighting a mobile battle against another mobile army. But obviously our dragon has a bird's eye view. Just putting it behind a hill or some buildings won't be sufficient. And again, we're dealing with a bit of a different situation. So we're going to be outfitting the artillery, the initial artillery, as if it were fighting a siege at the point where the dragon is being distracted. So assuming that it takes that initial bait, assuming it doesn't spot the additional batteries, now when the dragon is slowed down, potentially even stopped entirely, now is the time for them to open fire. I would want all of the heaviest possible guns dedicated to this role. One massive, immediate barrage with a mixture of round shot for those guns that are further afield, and firing canister, grape, and chain shot for all of the closest and heaviest guns. Again, we're going to take a lot out of the naval playbook here. All of them are aiming for those dragon wings. Most of these shots are going to miss by a long shot, but even if just a few of them are able to land reliable shots, those are large cannonballs and everything, up to 32 pounds potentially, if we're able to set it up right, well then it's possible by this point that those wings are going to be severely weakened and at least slowed, so the dragon isn't flying around as quickly as otherwise. Now, the closest men, they are not going to bother reloading because there's no chance, right? They abandon their guns and they run as quickly as they can over the ridges, away, from the field to any sort of predetermined rally point where they can potentially be able to hide or find some shelter, whatever it has to be. Normally, this is the sort of thing that artillerymen might do, like, if cavalry's charging them, you fire one last round and then you retreat to the cover of the infantry. But obviously, an infantry square is not going to be very helpful against a dragon. Now the furthest guns, the furthest hidden batteries, maybe they can still get another salvo out before following suit. And as those teams are falling back, they're going to be overtaken by the flying batteries. Smaller guns that are pulled by large teams of horses designed to rapidly deploy en masse wherever they're needed most on the battlefield. By now, the dragon is surely attacking these initial artillery positions, swooping all across the battlefield to engage whatever fleeing artilleryman it spots first. It's angry and it realizes what's happening, and so it's trying to more actively go all around to kill everything that it sees. But rather than the horse artillery massing into a grand battery like they normally might, instead, they're going to need to deploy in as many smaller pockets as they possibly can, and roughly in a long series of lines, one after another. As the dragon begins to attack any one of their positions, all of the other guns may thus open fire upon it. You ride in, unlimber the gun, fire around, maybe two, limber back up, keep on moving, so on and so forth. It's very possible that as they're working through this process, they're going to be suffering, again, a large number of casualties. But still, through their speed and with enough coordination, they might be able to work the dragon slowly but surely back away from the original point, closer to where the main army will be waiting for them. And we might pray, again, weakening those wings all the while, at least with the occasional hit, so long as then those waves of artillery are slowly able to move it back. That's what we're looking for here. So that ultimately, the dragon might come over some sort of a crest, or perhaps it enters a village or a valley that's surrounded by more hills, whatever it might be, and there the infantry will finally be able to spring into action, much like they did at Waterloo when Wellington disguised much of his force behind a rise in the ground and made it appear he was retreating. And rather than forming, 2 or 4 ranks deep like usual, they're going to be firing against a target that is airborne, meaning they can be really packed in, all of them firing upwards, thousands of shots. This is going to increase the risk to each one of them, yes, because one bit of dragon fire can, again, wipe out a column, but the goal now is to pour as much fire as possible into the beast. This is the real make or break point. This is the last chance. Now, thankfully, those muskets, are actually far more accurate than you may be led to believe. And this is a great, big, wounded, hopefully slower moving target at fairly close range, which leads me to believe these should be very effective volleys by this point. Hopefully, between this, the infantry, and continued artillery shots as well, it's finally going to be enough to destroy those wings sufficiently that it can't hold itself up. We will ground the bloodied beast. And only then will the cavalry swoop in. Cuirassiers, lancers, dragoons, you name it. If it's on horseback, it is charging in with pistols and lances and sabers and all the rest. If the cavalry begin their charge after those initial gunshots by the musketmen can begin, well, then hopefully they're getting there right in the nick of time to circle around the grounded beast, shooting and stabbing and slicing, finding any potential weak point on the thing and exploiting it. Again, like under the wings, the eyes, maybe a loose scale or something, whatever it would be. It's not going to be easy. The dragon's fire is still going to be sufficient to kill perhaps even hundreds of horsemen, but ultimately, much like an infantry square, it's only going to take one lucky horseman to get through and attack at a weakened point before the beast might lose its footing and ultimately collapse entirely. And that, my dear viewer, is how I believe a Napoleonic army might slay a dragon. Thank you all for watching. I hope you've enjoyed this silly little video, very silly indeed, a little different than the usual, I know, but hey, I figured something appropriate for St. George's Day, why not? Unless this is the day after St. George's Day, might be a little late in getting released. We'll see how things play out. But hey, fighting a dragon, it's fun, Thank you especially to those most heroic, of course, of dragon-slaying persons who support my work on Patreon, for it is only by virtue of their generosity that I am able to carry on with my work. And until the next time, Dear viewer, I am, and I shall remain, your most humble and obedient of servants. The next video will be more serious, I promise.